Hello, everybody. Huge welcome to Eigen TV. I'm so happy to see you here. Today, we're going to be joined by Gareth Davies from Bestem, who will be having a chat with Murray around the innovation around the fourth industrial revolution. It's a really, really exciting conversation. And as always, if you've got any questions at all, please pop them below and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. I'll be handing over to Murray now to kickstart the conversation. Thank you so much.
What we're talking implications of fourth industrial revolution. And change is coming. So how do you adapt? What are you going to do? That was where we were at, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. So the change is coming, or is already happening. Once you can, if you take the fourth industrial revolution lens, which is not my lens, this is a phrase that was Klaus Schwab who came up with the term 6-7 years ago now. But if you take that lens and apply it to the changes that we're seeing, things start to make a bit more sense. So you hear people in the pandemic saying that everything is accelerated 7 years or 10 years towards whatever the thing that they were thinking about is, whether that's digitalization or working from home or universal basic incomes or whatever direction they were looking at. They say the world has accelerated 10 years, but it's accelerated on all fronts 10 years. And what's the framework for that? And that framework, one of the frameworks that works for me is the fourth industrial revolution. And you see that in politics, you see it in taxation systems, you see it in industries which are emerging, those that are failing, and you see it in the way that people go about their digital tasks, does digitalization mean remote control of your oil field, or does it mean doing Zoom meetings with people? That's different people say it different ways, but they all call it digitalization. But this idea of remote sensing, working in a location different from where the operation is happening, this collaboration piece, using technology in order to analyze information and data, all of those things are digitalization, and everybody's seen digitalization increase. And you know, I'm sure you've got kids at school doing homeschooling. Suddenly, all the schools went online, and now that's digitalization as well. They're right, it is.
I have 3 right now in lessons in different rooms online with their teachers. Exactly. Right now.
And so we've all gone digital, but we don't know how to do it. If we go back a year ago and said to any teacher, I'll say any teacher, the majority of teachers, do you want to do your lessons on Zoom? I think that you get a lot of people going, well, I'm not entirely sure what that is or how it works. Now you're seeing some people emerge into digital masters. Some schools and some teachers are incredible in what they've innovated around the technology that in front of them. Given the situation, they've invented ways of doing this, and some are using their old methods of teaching as if there was a classroom and they're talking into the camera, and it's not really working the same way. So things have moved on. It's digitalization. Some people are embracing it and some people aren't.
So we had a conversation a while ago about the transition from steam to electricity. And that stuck in my mind because it seems to have, it's such a great metaphor for what's happening now, almost. And the story goes that for the people who had built factories on steam, it never made sense to change to electricity. There was never an economic reason because they always looked at the incremental cost. What's the cost of changing versus the incremental sales or whatever. Of course, all it will do is put their costs up in the short term, and they're still making the same product. So will they sell more of it? But the difference came when the new factories built from the ground up using electricity. Suddenly, they could work 24 hours a day. They were on off. They could shut down bits that didn't matter, and their efficiencies put the steam out of business.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. But and had the problem itself not changed, then steam versus electricity, you would have had that argument forever. Which one is better? And it would have been probably marginal, it would have been a choice. So for instance, and the same thing happens, let's say, look at electric cars right now, electric car versus a petrol car, well, it's a choice. It's maybe not quite as good, or maybe it's a bit better, or I'm not entirely sure, but it looked, it's not an obvious choice to make. The same thing happened with steam and electricity empowering factories. And the reason that electricity became dominant was not because to solve the same problem that the steam factories were solving, it was any better. It enabled a different problem to be solved. And that was the problem which was closer to what people wanted. So you ended up with shorter runs of whatever they were manufacturing, different varieties of it, because you could run a machine, reconfigure a machine in different ways. You could have a factory who did, instead of one product really well, did 100 products really well, one corner of the factory doing one thing, one corner of the factory doing another thing, and they could stop and start the production lines at different times. So you ended up with a different output, which was more valuable than the output, relatively speaking, from the steam factory.
So question, so did the people who built the electricity factories know that was the case at the time, or were they able to better adapt when the need came, such that it put the steam out? So phrased slightly differently, was that incorporated in their business models? And did the people with steam just completely forget to incorporate that? Or did neither know at the time, and then suddenly like an evolutionary force came, and suddenly the ones that could adapt were the electric ones?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. It depends who you ask. I mean, I think if you ask Elon Musk what he thinks about electric cars, I bet his vision goes a lot further than Tesla. That would be my guess. And probably extends beyond what is reasonable, probably. So, but if you look at something that has, if you look at a steam factory, you look at it, you've probably found, at the turn of the century or before, it had literally run out of steam. It got to where it could get to, right? And you looked at the electric factory, and you probably went, "There's a world of possibilities here. I don't know what they are, but we're only at the start of this. It can move in lots of different directions. I don't quite know where it's going to go, but I think we understand steam well enough that we've got it going as far as it's going to go." Therefore, some people would have made that move to electric, going, well, why not? It's something that's different. Maybe I could make a factory in a location that I couldn't do before, because maybe I don't need the same natural resources around it. So maybe that's why I did it. But once I've got it, then we can start to look at different ways that we can use this. And then suddenly I can take opportunities, the marginal opportunities that wouldn't have worked for steam. Could you do me, 2,000 of this unit? Well, actually, yes, I can, Whereas a steam factory would, no, I can't. I can only do 2 million units.
Yeah.
And anything below that's not economic, so no, I can't. So, it maybe that sort of thing. And then that ability then leads on to different ways of thinking and different ways, creative thought along those lines. And then, as an organized innovation front, if you like, lots of people start to see this. Lots of people try different things, some of which are good ideas, some of which are not. And it's this sort of incremental.
So this leads then into the idea of valuing ideas, I guess, because it's something that I know I've thought a lot about over the time is this idea of the business case, the justification for something. And it seems to almost always come down to a money figure, a dollar figure for, well, what will this cost to do, and what will it mean in terms of either more income or saved expense at some point in the line, and that seems to be the decision. But so often you find that the benefits that come from just moving forward, almost like we'll do something, as long as you're moving, you learn stuff on the way, and that lights up other opportunities as you go. So I know you've been working a lot in innovation. How do you find the state of the frameworks for valuing or evaluating innovation at the moment, and do they need to change?
That's a very good question. I think it depends where you draw the lines, and the answer for the creation of the initial innovation movement is different from the commercialization of that innovation, which is different from the buying decision from that innovation. So there's sort of like 3 chunks to this. The initial innovation sort of spark of creativity, that's a difficult one to put around a business case. And I think it's almost a way of living that some people have. And some people, it's just what they do. And I don't think you can set off down an innovative route and say, I'm going to do this innovation because I'm going to make 15% IRR on this one innovation. I think what we discovered is if you have, pursue a portfolio of good ideas in lots of different ways, some of them will work and some of them won't, and on average you'll get something out of it at the end of the day, and it's quite useful to do. And if you take that sort of approach to those sparks of creativity style ideas, I think that's the way to go. I think if you try to boil that down too quickly, you're going to, you won't have enough information to make the decision, because you have to make it on your beliefs and your assumptions, and therefore your beliefs and assumptions are probably incorrect, and they won't be challenged until you go down those routes to find out what's possible. So I think if you calculate that too hard, you've overthought the problem using assumptions that are probably not correct, and you need to find more information in order to get there. So I think that bit is one part. Then you've got the commercialization of innovation, and that tends to be where I work most, is in that how do we catch those good ideas, recognize them for what they are, and find a way to bring them to market. So that's the commercial innovation, which is very much where I play. And that, I think that can be, a process can be applied to that. And the issue at that point is it's rarely false negatives. That's not usually the problem at that point, because by the time you get there, it's false positives, which are the expensive thing, because you've seen the ideas, you know what they are, and you understand what they do and what they could enable. You do understand that at this point, but what you don't understand is how to turn that into something which is going to make money out of it. And a false positive in that is quite expensive, because you can go all the way down the track and then discover that you've overlooked something rather fundamental, not in the product, but in its application. You have misunderstood the customer situation, their alternatives, and how they're thinking, so that what you think is a great idea is only a great idea with the assumptions that you use, and your assumptions are wrong. And you can spend quite a lot of time and effort going down that road. So I work with companies in that space to put a framework in place that maintains momentum, but yet gets you to think about, what do you really know here, and what are you assuming, and how do you test the assumptions that you have, and understand which options you could have for commercializing this, choosing one, and then moving forward and building out the coalitions of the different people that you need to make that work. It's just sort of this team-based approach. When you get to the other end, I know I worked with you early on with some of your customers, and this idea of bringing customers in very early was fundamentally necessary to clarify our own thinking about what the product did, because we knew what it could do, but we didn't really know the other side's problems. We thought we knew them, sort of like that, but it wasn't. That's not really our world. That's their world. And if you get the right person to go, I've got this solution that sort of does this, and they go, yeah, it does that, but it actually does this really well. Yeah, it does that too. That's fine. That ability to understand all those different viewpoints, put it together. That's when you find that commercial solution within those innovations, and that's the difficulty.
That's a great point, and that ties back to something actually Adam Ballard was saying in the last week's video, which was where robotics was heading. So you can solve a particular problem, like the example given was to recognize a gauge and read the pressure on it, and recognize if it's a needle gauge or a LCD readout. But the point was, well, that's great as a starting point, but it's no good until I can put it on a robot that can navigate itself to a point, recognize that it's at the right point, orientate itself, identify the correct pressure gauge, and then read that pressure. So so what I need in order to be able to use this last bit of development you've done, I need a robot that can automatically select the best route. So it needs a map of the area. It needs to avoid obstacles. It needs to be able to recognize the shapes first. So it was like that this is definitely a part of the solution, but it's not useful until I get the whole thing.
Completely right. And what you've just described there, Murray, is this idea of platform technologies. And the fourth industrial revolution is built, part of it is built on platform technologies. These things that, in order for me to do the last bit, which is valuable, I need this whole raft of innovations to have taken place that I can take advantage of. And then suddenly it's possible. So if you came up with a business case, let's say we're 1970, let's come up with a business case. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to, rather than send somebody up a bit of scaffolding to have a look at the flare stack, I'm going to fly a plane in there and have a look at it. Right. A 1970s plane with a camera. This is a 35mm camera. You're lucky you haven't got a guy with a flash gun on it, flying past in a Cessna. I mean, that's a ridiculous idea, right?
With material wings flying past a flare stack.
It's not a good idea, right? But now that's a very good idea, because on the way we have got all of the things that make drone flight possible, which involves lightweight batteries, it involves high-powered motors, it involves microwave communication, it requires GPS locations, it requires video feed. A whole heap of technologies had to sort of come together before that idea made any sense at all.
Yeah.
So these ideas have a time that they work, and they wouldn't have worked before. But if you're not aware of those platform technologies and where they're moving, and I've come across a lot of people who are not aware, then you can't see those possibilities, because if you hadn't seen what was developing in drones, and I came to you and said, I'd like to fly past your flare stack and take some pictures of it, and would like an inspection, you're going to be thinking Cessna, and you're going to be thinking a man with a 35mm camera, and you're going to think I'm crazy. Yeah. But it's not that crazy. It's quite a reasonable idea, and now, but it wasn't then. No. And of course, there's refinement needed, but it's possible.
Well, that's been one of our challenges as Eigen's grown up, and in having a technology with very few use cases early on, but this does some good stuff, and few people start to see it, and then you get the use cases, and then the language starts to come with it. So you start off with a technology, but without a language and a solution domain. But over time, you get there.
Well, I and this horrible pandemic that we've got going on, and the fact that no one can stand within 3 meters of each other, we're seeing all kinds of technologies that were already there becoming very important, especially offshore.
Yeah.
I mean, you must be fielding the phone calls every day of people going, you remember that thing you talked to me about, remote monitoring all my pressure sensors and getting all that data. I'm now interested. I now know why that's important. I was talking to, I shan't name him, but the CEO of a company up in Aberdeen who makes automatic or very simple to use flanging, no welding flanging solutions for replacing spools on platforms. And what he's done or his company's done for the last however many years has been training up unskilled is the wrong word, but general technicians offshore in order to use this tool so that they can replace flanges. Whereas before this was a specialist cutting problem, a welding problem, a very difficult problem to solve, which you require lots of specialist people to go out to your platform to do. He has got a tool which allows people to do it, and he has, by fortune, has trained up all the operators to use this. And it's lovely for him. He's just sending his tools off and renting his tools to the platforms, and they think it's fantastic because they don't have to put another body out there.
Yeah.
And there was an innovation whose time has just come, and I know how long that has taken to get to that point. And now it's one of the saviors of the North Sea, as is your technology.
And again, so this is someone who was quietly doing stuff, not in secret, but without much attention, and probably making a loss for a while, or certainly not making much profit, but investing.
Well, it was a good idea, but it wasn't. The alternatives weren't that bad. Steam versus electricity at the start. Yeah. The alternatives weren't that bad. You could just carry on as you were. And then suddenly you couldn't carry on as you were. And then suddenly that technology was what made the difference. But now it's possible. Why would you ever go back? Mm-hmm. Because it has fulfilled all the promises he said it would have. It is cheaper, it's faster, it's more efficient, it's a better quality product at the end of the day. Why would you ever go back? I mean, it just took something to be people to change their ways. But there was never a business case for it, because then, but there is a business case when you look back on it, but no one believes the business case in the way forward. And it's the same with your technology.
That's right, yes.
I see it with a lot of my customers who are in this sort of space where they've got something really good and it's a great idea. Take it out to the market, and it's like pushing treacle uphill. Sometimes it works. Sometimes this is it. We're off. No, one person's been convinced. And they're evangelists for it. And you're not wrong. You are not wrong. But but to get to that second and the third and the fourth, and to become a normal solution is quite hard. It's not hard because it's technically wrong. It's all human.
That's right. Well, I was encouraged somewhat looking back at the invention of the internal combustion engine, that you think, oh, that was in 1894 or whatever it was. But actually, no, there was developments in the late 1700s that contributed to this. And actually, there was a lot of improvements. And so, but it wasn't adopted in the motor car for many years. But we think it was fairly rapid, but it wasn't.
But isn't it amazing, though, that, and I reckon somewhere around about 2000-ish or somewhere around about, I think even Jeremy Clarkson, God bless him, suggested that the Veyron was the Concorde moment. And he's right, it was. I mean, the internal combustion engine reached its pinnacle about that sort of point. And we did all kinds of amazing things in computerizing an industrial internal combustion engine. When you think about that, it's quite mad, actually. We use all this electronics to control the explosions in the engine. And that's quite mad, really, when the electronics can just control an electric motor.
Much simpler.
Much simpler idea.
But it was
new thinking. It's like computerizing a set of bellows to heat your house, to pump the coal fire. I mean, it's just madness.
Yeah, but to be fair, it was the battery technology, I think, that held them up. The storage wasn't quite there. Probably could make cars that would do a short range.
Yeah, but you're right, but I think you're post justifying where they went to. I don't think the guys in Cosworth were thinking that when they were putting the electronic valve timing and controls and everything else on and sensors on the engine. I don't think they were thinking, oh, I'm doing this because we haven't got batteries. I don't think they were thinking that.
No, that's true. Well, there was the story of Vauxhall Chevrolet, who made an electric car. There was one called the Volt, yeah. and they gave it out to people to try, and everyone loved it. So they quickly took it away, destroyed them, and said no more about it, because they would prefer to make money out of combustion engines for a while more.
Yeah, but again, that's a very sort of rational way of looking at an organization that had 1 million people working in it. Well, no, for 20, 30,000 people in GM or something at the time. I don't know what the number is. But that rationality of that the whole organization decided that's what was going to happen is bullshit. That's not what happened. What happened was they did the Volt, it took off quite nicely, but the man in charge of the Volt division wasn't liked by his friends in GM, and thought, we'll bury him, and how are we going to do that? I mean, that's probably what happened, because I'm in charge of the pickup truck division, and that's the important one. We can't have this upstart doing well. We'll just remove his budget. That's what happens. Internal politics in these organisations.
Right, and there wasn't a sufficiently strong external driver at this point to overcome that.
No, and if you kill it quick enough, then no one will know.
Yeah. So that I thought you were going to say then that actually Chevrolet were interested in maintaining their jobs for people, which ironically may not have been a bad viewpoint. Looking at your second blog on the implications of the fourth industrial revolution on wealth concentration and the problems that we'll have when you improve productivity so that the few create all the products needed by the many. You still have to meet the basic living needs of the many.
Well, I live in the North Lane in Brighton, which is an area which came up. It's Regency England. So what Brighton is that it became an important place in the Napoleonic Wars. Up until then, no one cared about it. It was a backwoods fishing village that didn't really do very much, and there was very little happening. So the Napoleonic Wars happened. The troops came garrisoned down here, and it was the king's brother who was leading the garrison, and therefore it became quite a place to be, and it sort of sprung up. So it became the holiday destination at that point, and the Prince Regent came down, built his palace, and all this good stuff happened. But at the same time, after the Napoleonic Wars had ended, and they built the pavilion, which is the most opulent thing you've ever seen, almost bankrupt to the country building this thing. It's astonishing what's inside it. The area that I'm in was workers' cottages for the pavilion and the surrounding areas. It came up very quickly. So you had all the sort of society London came down, parading up and down the grand parades, all these big houses in Brighton, and this were the workers' cottages, which were alongside slaughterhouses and iron foundries and all that kind of stuff were in this area. The act of enclosure happens, the agricultural revolution gives way to the industrial revolution, and you end up with people being cleared from the lands. They all move into the cities. Brighton is one of them. The house that I live in at the moment is a 2-bedroom house, so 2-bedroom up, 2 rooms up, 2 stairs down, and a little extension on the back. But these 4 rooms held 6 families at one point, sleeping on top of each other. The place was full of cholera and disease. There was no sanitation here. This was proper deprivation. But across the road was a guy who had pretty much bankrupted the country and was living in opulence. And how we didn't have the French Revolution, I have no idea, because the French took a slightly different approach. We didn't have a revolution, but they did for the same reason.
Yeah. Okay.
So capitalism has this tendency to concentrate, and if you don't, and if you can build it generation by generation, which it tends to happen, you end up with people left behind who can never recover from that position. It's a compounding effect. So if we're all growing at 10%, that's fine. But if I'm starting $1 million and you're starting £1, we can all go up 10%, but you're never going to catch me, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens with this sort of concentration of wealth, and it's a difficult problem to solve. As a society, we're going to have to think about ways of solving that, because the way that we've distributed wealth since 1900 has been very much on industrial man. Get your job in the factory, get promoted up the factory, and the better worker you are, the more money that you'll receive, and you get the rising of the middle classes coming up, and the distribution through that, and that appears to be going away. And that we haven't got a solution to that, but I think we're going to have to find one.
So your argument that GDP or productivity being the wrong measure, I think, is a good one, because the illustration you give is that, well, if we're all producing stuff, we need to have people that buy it. We're going to outproduce the consumption. We'll end up with piles and piles of products very efficiently made that no one wants.
Well, that was Henry Ford said that when he made the Model T. He want to pay his workers well because he wants them to buy a car. It's true.
So, and this is the point then, that we need to find other ways of circulating the wealth, be it paying for art or something, because one way or another, we have to pay for people. People need an income, and if people are going to have successful businesses, they need people with disposable income to do it.
I'm going to pull you back on that. Only within our paradigm do people need an income. And if you go off to the hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa, well, they don't have incomes.
But to survive, we need a mechanism that for people not dying in the streets, basically. So if we take away, if we remove the number of jobs, so the localized solution of, well, my profitability's gone up because I'm producing this much with less cost, but as a result, the number of people who don't have work goes up. One way or another, they still have to eat.
Well, the mechanism we have at the moment, and please don't think I'm some kind of radical communist. I'm not. I don't try to think about these problems. But the mechanism we've got at the moment, money is used to direct activity, and so you will direct your productive activity to the places where, in theory, you get the most money, or at least enough money. And this idea that if I can produce something with less people, and therefore less cost, that's a good thing. It used to be a good thing because then your surplus labor would be removed from yours and go somewhere else, and we had a shortage of labor at the time, and that was a great way to allocate labor. It worked very well. But we've optimized it really, really well. And most of these systems work in the middle and they don't work at the edges. You pick any system of organization, and there's been lots of different ones tried, and they all work for a while, but they don't, you overextend them, and those kind of end limits arise. But at the end of the day, it's a closed system of a planet that we're on. There are a fixed number of people that we're here and a fixed number of years that we're here for, and that's it. And it's really about how does humanity as a species progress through that and direct its labor in the right places. I mean, the idea that people will be dying on the street is ridiculous. It's only if people die on the street, it's because we chose for them to die on the streets, because we decided that money was more important than them, and that Mr. Bezos had all the money at that point, and he wasn't going to give us any, so we all had to die because he was fine.
That's where I'm coming from. Because what you do is you change the rules at that point. People, so the rules go so far, and then you realize, well, hang on, all the money's ended up with that guy, and everyone else has nothing. Right. Well, you need to give some back, or we need to find another way of starting again, or getting a system working.
If Mr. Bezos was standing in his driveway owning all the money, and there was 1 million people with pitchforks outside, I think he would be persuaded to
exactly. That's what happens. The situation changes. We don't like the game anymore. So
I mean, society only works because we willingly
stick to the rules. Yeah.
We participate in it. Not everybody does, but if most people do, then we can sort of organize ourselves as a society and sort of walk forward. But the mechanism that we used for doing that is entirely open for debate and has been for generations.
That's right.
The Egyptians did it differently, right?
Yeah.
The Romans did it differently. This is just the way that we do it at the moment. And so those big assumptions that everyone thinks are there, which are then imputed into business cases without question, may not be the case. I mean, who would have said a year ago, what we'll do is we'll close every single business, and it's okay, we'll just pay you to stay at home.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we finessed it a bit, but that's sort of what we're saying, really. I mean, there's slightly finesse around that. There's gaps in the system because we didn't know we were going to have to do it. But that was no one's business case. No. It had that in it.
Well, if it did, you'd have got laughed out the room.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight. Your project only works if there's a global pandemic and everyone gets told to go home. What are the chances of that? Out.
There's a chap that I worked with a few years ago, a young chap, very, very good. And he was on my team. And one day he came to me and said, I need to leave my job. I said, well, why? And he says, I've been writing this game for an iPhone. And it's doing rather well. I just launched it yesterday, and it's looking like it's quite good. And I said, well, what's the game? He says, it's about a global pandemic, he said. And it's, this was 2005, I guess it wasn't that then. And it's going about a global pandemic, and the rules are you have to adjust your virus so that it's and decide where you launch it. And I've got all the air routes where people travel to, and if you make it too infectious, then people die too quickly. And if you launch it in America, or it gets to America too quickly, they find a cure before long. And so you have to launch it just the right place, and then it's runs a simulation, and people can play with their virus, and you get sort of different.
Well.
And he says, doing rather well. I said, well, okay, well, it says, yeah, I got 3 months notice. And I said, well, are you sure? I said, yeah. I said, well, whenever you want to come back, you can come back. Last time I talked to him, he owned most of East London, from what I could tell. He's never looked back. He's done really well out of it. I'm not sure how the sales are at the moment. I suspect the level of interest in playing pandemics may have gone down.
Is that what it's called, pandemics?
No, since this is going on video, I won't mention the name of it, but he'll know who I mean.
I'm going to try and look it up now. I quite fancy playing it.
I will let you know the precise one after this. But yeah, no, I guess he gets £1 from every download. It's been downloaded multiple million times or something. So it's done very well. Done far better than I ever did, and I was sitting there thinking these iPhones and the games that are going with iPhones is all just a bit rubbish, really. So it's never gonna take off that.
Right.
It's like shareware. Yeah. Okay. I missed that one.
and that actually takes us back to what you were saying at the start, that what you're seeing, the businesses that are going to struggle now are the ones who are looking at the energy transition and saying, "Oh,
I've seen that before."
We'll still need oil.
The App Store for me was shareware, and remember that thing in the 1980s when people were giving away free bits of software on disk for £1 or something.
On the cover of magazines and stuff. Yeah.
There was absolutely nobody made any money out of it at all. Massive craze, went nowhere, and that's what I thought the App Store was going to be. How wrong was I? But I was using, but the people that came up had never seen that thing. They went, that's a really good idea. That'll work. Yeah. So presumably there's hundreds of these going on right now, which I also have not spotted.
Transitions or
just these ideas coming up of places where things are right to go, and I'm not seeing them.
No, it's true. It's so interesting watching the kids because they're playing Among Us. I play a lot of that. Minecraft is still popular, but TikTok, none of them are on Facebook at all. It's all some WhatsApp, or in fact, WhatsApp. They're not really using social media platforms like Facebook anymore.
Well, I think this idea of broadcasting your life to the world has just got a little bit boring, isn't it? Who wants to do that anymore? It's
no. That's not. They're either on TikTok or Instagram, and they're using lives. And what you're seeing now more than ever is like 12 and 13-year-olds setting up Etsy stores to make pocket money, and they're promoting them through social media. So gone are the days where we used to do paper rounds and things like that. Now the new thing is like e-commerce and entrepreneurialism, and promoting that through different social mediums. So there's a huge surge.
But isn't that fascinating? So I mean, I think that's fantastic, and maybe that's absolutely what we're saying about this fourth industrial revolution, though, that they won't have jobs. Perhaps this idea of come work for me. No, I'll just work for myself. Thank you very much. I'll be fine. My own creativity will be there, right? And if that's the case, good luck. And I think that's a great way of having an economy. An artisan-based economy could be, or at least a segment of the economy could be great. But it does then raise some questions about what are the advantages of belonging to an organised labour pool, because you can get this collective responsibility. You know, if we work for a factory of 1,000 people and somebody breaks their leg, the other 999 will pay for them once they get better. As part of the, you know, the contract, whether you insure that out or whatever else, something. But if you're out on your own, that's not the case. You know, if you suddenly trap your finger in your sewing machine, you're out of action making teddy bears for the next 6 months. And who's going to be paying your bills, right? So there are some social constructs around this that are going to be required to make this not be it's okay by the luck of the draw. But unfortunately, every so often the Uber driver falls off his bicycle and there's a bit of a problem, you know. So, you know, what's that?
Yeah, Uber's an interesting one, yeah.
Yeah, I was only going to say, I think that's kind of common now as well, as more and more people, as a result of lockdown, an awful lot of people lost their jobs, and you've seen a huge surgence of small businesses popping up where people have decided to take more control of their future, if you like. So now all of a sudden that responsibility, if something were to happen and they're the main breadwinner, there's, you know, that risk is there. One of the interesting things that I'm kind of like debating at the moment is, are we losing specific skills across, you know, different industries? Because I grew up going to university, doing my corporate world, and then going on to run my businesses, and the skills I learned in my corporate world helped me with my businesses. But children and the next generation are growing up and going, you know, they've got this wonderful confidence that probably, I know, my generation didn't have at the time, where they can take on the world and, you know, go and build these great businesses and everything. But actually in doing so, are they missing, you know, in building up their skill repertoire? And I don't mean entrepreneurial muscle, I mean the other types of skills that we learn within working within companies and innovating and those kind of things.
Well, yeah. Let me challenge you. I'm going to challenge your thinking. Not that I have an answer. I'm just going to challenge your thinking. Okay. Because I have these skills as well. You know, I joined the workforce in 1991 as a bit of a computer geek, knowing quite a lot about computers. For the first 3 or 4 years of my life, I learned a bit more about computers. From then on, I learned how to play the game. And the game was HR, it was sales, it was accounting, and filling in the forms, going to meetings, doing planning things. Nothing to do with what I did, but this thing which was supposed to be organizing, presumably other people who I've now forgotten about, to do the work. I mean, I don't quite know what value all that stuff in the middle had, but was a lot of it, and you got rewarded for doing it. But most of it was pointless, really. But apparently it had to happen. And maybe in 1950 it had to happen because we had no way for the guy at the top to know what the guy at the bottom was doing and issue instructions. So therefore you had to sort of self-coordinate, and therefore you had to train people to just not screw it up in the middle all over the place. And this was the skill set that we learned. Maybe that skill set is entirely irrelevant now. So the skills that you need as an individual aren't there. However, what I think is, if I pick up on what you said there, these kids who've got these entrepreneurial skills who will go on and build great businesses. That last part of the sentence I have an issue with, because building great businesses, we say that, but we think about it, we kind of then think that employ lots of people and have lots of offices and have lots of, hang on, no, I don't think that's ever going to happen, right? So this build great business part of the sentence, I think we might need to revisit. And maybe they won't have skills to do that, but then, you know, it's all very well you and your computers, but can you look after my water wheel? No.
But maybe the definition of great is not great big businesses, it's just great. Maybe it's just they're great because they afford that person the quality of life that they want and enough income to have some security or whatever. So maybe it's just the definition of, or the lens you use on great,
or it's impactful in their space or something like that. It's I think you're right.
There's a great video on YouTube, and it's from Wired magazine, and it's a documentary on Shenzhen in China, which is I think it's called the hardware revolution or something like that. It's called, the Silicon Valley of hardware. That's what it's called. And Shenzhen in China, and I've been doing kind of, as a hobbyist, under lockdown, I've been buying lots of little bits from China to wire them all together, and they all come from Shenzhen. And this, so I went to have a look and find out what happened. Shenzhen was a fishing village 20 years ago. This was nothing, and now it is like the fourth biggest city in the world. It's huge, and it's all built on electronics. But it's individual people doing electronics. They're not large companies. There are Mr. Whoever has got one store and he does this part, and this person has a store that does this part. And then somebody has an idea and he pulls on 10 other people to make some kind of product. And they try the product to see if it works. And then somebody takes that product, makes it a bit better, and you get 6 versions of the same thing. And this whole city is built on, it's like a living organism of an electronics factory, but it consists of individuals. It doesn't consist of companies. It's utterly astonishing. And occasionally 1 or 2 companies rise out of it, but it's pretty rare. And I think it's an interesting documentary to have a look at as to a different model for capitalism. And they were asking the question in this documentary that around, because we have open source software movements, we don't really have open source hardware. So you end up with Apple coming up with some device that they've got, and then everything is, you can't copy any aspect of it. So the rounded corners on the phone, that's an Apple thing. You can't have rounded corners because Apple rounded the corners first.
Except you can on an Android.
Well, yes, but they must have got around it somehow. But it's utterly ridiculous, some of these things. I mean, the idea that you can be, you can take the world's resources, your unfair proportion of it, because you decided to do this little innovation. And they're saying, well, that's very well, but we'll take that innovation and then we're going to make it better. Oh no, you can't make it better. No, only I can make it better. And it sort of stifles that creativity. And that's not happening in the Shenzhen region. Yes, the IP lawyers are not the least bit happy about it, but it's an interesting kind of model that we're going to have to get into if we go down this individual creative route. It's going to have to go that way. And quite interesting, it's not going to be worth suing anybody, because you infringe my patent. How many did you sell? 6. It's not going to be worth writing the letter, is it? Really?
Yeah.
Let alone taking the court for it, because But if you make 6, I make 6, and you make 6, it's a bit like this. Perhaps what happened on this Reddit. What was it? GameStop.
GameStop, yeah.
We all did a little bit of it. Is it market manipulation when everybody does it? Surely they are the market.
Yeah.
They manipulate themselves. How did that work precisely? Manipulate the market as a concept is like one person fooling a lot of people. When a lot of people take on one person, I think you'll find that was the market. They weren't manipulating it; they were the market. And it's the same, I think, with a lot of these micro.
This is like the idea of an ecosystem, then, that these small things come together to, just like you were saying, organic. It's like it reconfigures itself. It's hard to pin down.
It's going to be a really interesting time. I don't know quite where it leads, but I can tell what's not going to succeed. I don't know where, these large corporations that try to control everything, or I think they're going to have a trouble. I think Amazon did really, really well because it was the first company to realize that the computer was the company. They didn't have an IT department. They were they really understood that, and a lot of businesses haven't understood that. But once they do start to understand that, I think Amazon's going to have a lot of trouble, because it's so big and so complicated that I suspect it's only done very, very well because everybody else was asleep.
I think let's close this one for today and just say thanks very much, Gareth, for sharing your thinking. It's always really, really insightful.